The half-eaten meal sat fossilized on the low, polished obsidian table. A crumbling loaf of bread, shards of dried fruit, and a goblet tipped just so, the ancient, solidified liquid spilling eternally toward the rim. It wasn't the food, nor the strange, geometrically perfect architecture of the cavern city that made Dr. Eris Thorne freeze. It was the chilling, absolute lack of struggle. The city of Sidon had not been sacked, nor had its inhabitants starved. They had simply ceased to be. Thorne, a man whose life was dedicated to digging up the messy ends of history, found only pristine, suffocating silence. He stood in the main plaza, carved entirely out of the heart of the great mountain, surrounded by hundreds of structures that spoke of a high, complex civilization. One that understood hydrostatics, advanced mathematics, and, most bizarrely, acoustics in a way no contemporary culture ever achieved. There were no bodies, no skeletons, no bloodstains, burn marks, or signs of forced entry. The expedition team, funded by a secretive consortium looking for untapped geothermal energy sources deep in the desolate Serpent's Coil mountain range, had accidentally punched through the ceiling of this forgotten world, sealed for millennia by a freak seismic event that effectively corked the valley entrance. This was not Pompeii, where life was frozen in an instant of ash and fire. This was something far more unnerving. This was a vacuum where life had been meticulously extracted. The beds were made, tools were neatly arranged on workshops' benches, clothing was folded at the foot of sleeping platforms, and in one residence, a small wooden toy lay abandoned next to what appeared to be a child's unfinished homework, a tablet etched with complex, circular diagrams. Thorne estimated the civilization's peak around 1500 BC, placing them far ahead of the Mycenaeans in certain key fields, especially metallurgy and energy transmission. Their most prevalent signature was the ubiquitous presence of what Thorne initially labeled tuning stones, massive, carved monoliths made of dark, crystalline granite positioned at precise intervals throughout the city and extending deep into the mountain rock. When Thorne's geologists tapped one of these stones with a hammer, it didn't chime, it hummed. The sound wasn't loud, but deep, resonating through the soles of their boots, a low-frequency vibration that felt less like noise and more like pressure. It seemed as if the entire mountain was subtly vibrating to an unseen rhythm, a rhythm that had powered the city, illuminated its halls using phosphorescent crystals embedded in the walls, and seemingly regulated the very temperature and atmosphere of the enclosed space. But the greatest mystery was found in the city's central chamber, the resonance nexus. There, situated on a pedestal of polished serpentine, lay the single most important artifact, the silent obsidian tablet. It was roughly the size of a shield, jet black, and unnervingly smooth, reflecting the light of their modern headlamps with an alien sheen. It was covered in Sidon's highly stylized script, a script that Thorne had spent 10 years trying to decipher from smaller fragments found scattered across the region. Unlike every other piece of Sidon script they had encountered, this tablet was not merely informative, it seemed to be a definitive final record. Thorne started the painstaking process of translation, feeling the oppressive weight of the abandoned city pressing down on him, realizing that the story held within this black stone was the ultimate dark truth behind a civilization that had decided, in one singular coordinated action, to vanish entirely from the face of the earth. To understand the sudden, chilling absence, one must first understand Sidon at its zenith, during the period they called the Age of Harmonic Ascent. The Sidonians were not sun worshippers, nor did they look to the heavens for guidance. They looked inward, specifically downward, into the resonant heart of the earth itself. Their civilization was founded on the philosophy of isolation and controlled frequency. The Serpent's Coil Mountains, which protected them from the nomadic, warlike Varan tribes and the sprawling, messy empires of the coastal regions, were not just a defense. They were an energy insulator. The unique geological composition of the plateau allowed them to tap into the natural, low-frequency oscillations of the Earth's core, a perpetual, seismic hum they called the telluric chord. The tuning stones and the vast subterranean network of carved tunnels acted as amplifiers and transmitters, creating a city-wide resonant field. This field did everything. It provided warmth by exciting the latent molecules in the surrounding rock, filtered the air, and, critically, maintained a profound level of societal harmony. Imagine a city where background noise, physical discomfort, and even emotional fluctuations were subtly dampened, smoothed out by a perpetual, pervasive hum tuned precisely to the human nervous system. Their technology was less about mechanical force and more about vibrational influence. The Resonance Council, the governing body of Sidon, was comprised not of kings or generals, but of the master acousticians, priest engineers who could literally tune the city. Their libraries were not filled with military histories, but with intricate charts detailing mood stabilization frequencies and crystalline matrix alignment protocols. Life in Sidon was efficient, incredibly long. Records suggested average lifespans exceeding 120 years, and utterly uniform. They had achieved what every utopia has dreamed of: freedom from want, fear, and discord. But this perfection came at an unseen architectural price. The entire social structure was geared toward maintaining the perfect frequency. Any emotional outburst, a burst of rage, overwhelming sadness, even excessive, uncontrolled joy, was considered dissonance. Dissonance, the council taught, was literally damaging to the resonant field that sustained their infrastructure and their lives. Children were raised in soundproofed, specially tuned nurseries, learning to regulate their internal state before they could walk. Adults underwent mandatory weekly harmonic cleansings, where they lay on resonance beds and had their internal frequencies recalibrated. The population of Sidon was stable, deliberately capped to prevent resource strain or cultural diversification, which the council feared would inevitably introduce harmonic instability. They were a perfectly calibrated machine, humming along in blissful, technologically induced unity. But machines need fuel, and the pristine facade of Sidon's perfection masked a fundamental flaw in the system. The deeper thorn translated the historical Sidon scrolls found near the Nexus. The clearer the horrifying trade-off became. The telluric chord was powerful, but imperfect. It produced static or residual noise that threatened to contaminate the city's delicate balance. The council discovered that this noise could only be neutralized by an opposite, powerful, controlled, energetic release. A release that could not be manufactured, only harvested. They had found the perfect way to maintain their golden age, but the method required a continuous, dark tax upon humanity itself. The first cracks in the Sidon tapestry began subtly, not in the structural integrity of the mountain city, but in the psychological landscape of its people. Despite the council's meticulous control, the human spirit, like the subterranean springs feeding the valley, always found a way to resist being entirely channeled. The Sidonians, renowned for their long lives, began to suffer from a mysterious affliction they named the silent apathy. It wasn't depression as modern medicine understands it. It was a profound, pervasive dullness, an inability to feel deeply, to create, or to strive. The enforced harmonic uniformity, designed to eliminate negative dissonance, had inadvertently pruned the peaks of positive emotion as well. The art they created became mathematically precise, but emotionally sterile. Their relationships were harmonious, but passionless. The high energy and mental clarity provided by the resonant field began to feel less like a blessing and more like a high-definition prison. The council noticed the declining birth rates and the increasingly difficult task of motivating their citizenry to maintain the complex systems. This was the era where the Resonance Council shifted from benevolent regulators to hidden authoritarians. They realized their system was bleeding potential energy, the energy of unexpressed, vibrant human emotion. To compensate for this loss, they expanded their search for the specific crystals and heavy elements required to boost the raw power input from the telluric cord. This forced the Sidonians, who prided themselves on their isolation, to establish highly dangerous, secretive trade routes through the Serpent's Coil passes, venturing into the territories of the fiercely territorial Varan tribes. These initial interactions were disastrous. The Varans, crude and primal by Sidon standards, were naturally aggressive, viewing the pale, finely dressed Sidonians with suspicion and envy for their clear, flawless tools and strange light sources. The conflicts were inevitable, and while Sidon's engineers could use acoustic blasts to repel attackers, true warfare introduced massive, unpredictable dissonance into their protective field. Every skirmish, every casualty sent shockwaves through the carefully tuned city, requiring massive amounts of energy and human effort to re-stabilize the harmony. The Resonance Council, desperate to maintain the illusion of perfect control and stability, started fabricating narratives. They designated the external Varans as uncontrolled noise sources and began weaving tales of constant, existential danger, hoping that manufactured external fear would unify the populace internally. But the fear they generated was unstable, requiring immediate containment. This is when the true, dark secret of the Sidon resonance began to crystallize, literally. Thorne found detailed engineering schematics for a parallel system, hidden deep beneath the city's sewage and water filtration plant, a secondary nexus described chillingly in the texts as the regulator of residual energy. The schematics detailed complex biological feedback loops and crystalline conduits that routed excess psychic energy, specifically the unstable, chaotic emotional overflow created by fear and pain, away from the main grid. This energy, rather than being simply dispersed, was actively harvested and condensed into a highly volatile, potent substance, the perfect, dark fuel for their perpetual golden age. The discovery of the regulator fundamentally changed the historical narrative. Sidon didn't vanish due to external pressure. It had perfected a system that required a continuous, horrifying sacrifice. The expansion of the regulator of residual energy marked the point of no return for the Sidonians. The priest engineers of the Resonance Council were faced with a critical problem. How do you generate massive, sustained levels of unpredictable, high-amplitude emotional energy, chaos, fear, despair, in a society meticulously engineered for absolute, flatline stability? The answer was chillingly pragmatic and entirely concealed from the general population. They didn't need external enemies. They needed internal control groups. The council began selecting certain families, those exhibiting slight genetic anomalies, minor neurological differences, or simply those with no social standing, designating them as dissonant carriers. These carriers were systematically isolated and moved into segregated, specialized sectors of the city. These sectors were intentionally excluded from the main harmonic field, allowing the natural human experience of pain, sorrow, and stress to flourish unchecked. When the energy grid required a critical boost, when the telluric chord's hum weakened, or when an external Varan attack caused too much fluctuation, the council would initiate what they termed a cyclic calibration event within these segregated zones. The texts translated by Thorne were terrifyingly clinical, describing the process of induced terror and despair with mathematical precision. It wasn't about torture for pleasure. It was industrial emotional farming. Specialized acoustic tools were deployed not to stabilize, but to amplify and modulate the dissonance of the segregated population, effectively concentrating their psychic output and routing it through the regulator. The result was a burst of raw, chaotic energy that stabilized the main city's frequency, allowing the vast majority of Sidonians to continue their long, passionless lives in undisturbed harmony, blissfully unaware of the horrors happening just 3 levels beneath them. This sustained harvest, however, had an unforeseen and catastrophic side effect that began to manifest in the carriers. The constant emotional draining led to a phenomenon described as the whisper sickness, a deep, irreversible spiritual exhaustion resulting in hallucinations, chronic pain, and eventually a silent psychological collapse. These victims, having been stripped of their vital internal energy, eventually died, leaving no physical trace of trauma, their bodies simply fading into extreme weakness. This grim reality explained Thorne's initial finding, the lack of bodies. The Sidonians had perfected a way to make people disappear quietly, efficiently, by draining the very essence of their being. For centuries, this horrifying system worked. Sidon remained a beacon of scientific advancement and societal perfection, built upon a foundation of suffering engineered by its own government. But the moral and energetic cost was mounting. The council, though masters of acoustics and geology, were terrible at human resource management. They had systematically eroded the trust and the future of their civilization. The fear generated by the cyclic calibration events wasn't entirely contained. Whispers, actual, psychological whispers heard only by the sensitive, began to leak into the main harmonic field. The general populace began experiencing fleeting moments of unexplained terror, phantom memories of pain that were not their own. The perfectly tuned society was beginning to crack, poisoned by the very anguish it had tried to eliminate. The council knew the system was unsustainable. The required input of suffering was rising exponentially, while the available population pool of carriers was shrinking. They needed a final solution, a maneuver so radical that it would either save Sidon forever or erase it entirely. The truth, hidden behind layers of crystalline encryption, was that the vanishment was not a collapse. It was the execution of this final, desperate, apocalyptic plan. The translated section of the silent obsidian tablet provided the chilling justification for the civilization's final act, forcing Thorne to pause his meticulous work and stare out at the empty, echoing cityscape. It spoke not of war or plague, but of moral calculus. The text was signed not by an individual, but by the collective voice of the perpetual frequency, indicating the council's consensus decision. The final entry detailed the rapid acceleration of the whisper sickness and the inevitable moment when the sheer magnitude of required suffering would necessitate turning the regulator upon the entire city, eliminating the Golden Age entirely. The Varan tribes, though annoying, were a minor concern. The existential threat was the imminent collapse of their carefully constructed reality. Faced with the choice between universal, chaotic suffering or a unified, controlled, absolute disappearance, the council chose the latter. The core moral debate, laid bare in the ancient script, was this: is it justifiable for a society to sacrifice the existence of the few, or even the majority, if that sacrifice guarantees the preservation of its collective knowledge and inherent goodness for a future reawakening? The Sidonians believed, definitively, that their culture was too valuable to be lost to chaos, even if saving it meant erasing themselves from the current timeline. Their vanishing was a highly complex, coordinated form of societal hibernation. They aimed to escape the consequences of their own dark energy system, effectively pausing their existence until the geological and energetic conditions of the world outside were perfectly recalibrated, allowing them to restart their civilization without the need for the corrupting regulator. It was an act of profound technological narcissism, a belief that they were worthy of transcending reality itself. But translating the text brought up a deep, unnerving question for Thorne, one that transcended the historical context and touched upon the nature of progress itself. We see many examples in history where the advancement of human civilization, be it in the construction of pyramids, the speed of industrialization, or even the pursuit of cutting-edge artificial intelligence today, is inextricably linked to the quiet exploitation or sacrifice of a marginalized few. This foundational moral compromise seems to repeat itself across epochs. The Sidonians simply industrialized the process of sacrifice. If a technology or a societal structure offers perfect harmony and immortality to 99% of the population, but requires the systematic, engineered suffering and death of the remaining 1%, does that society have the moral right to continue existing? Or does the inherent wrongness of the sacrifice taint the entire endeavor beyond redemption? I want you, the viewer, to pause right now and consider this difficult question in the context of our own world and share your thoughts in the comments below. The council believed their survival was paramount. They called their final plan the Great Unison. It was not an evacuation route. It was an interdimensional switch. To execute it, they needed a massive energy spike, far beyond anything the telluric cord could provide naturally. They needed a catastrophic event, one that would provide the ultimate, overwhelming burst of chaotic dissonance to power the final transition. They decided to generate this energy themselves, using the very thing they feared most: a massive, engineered seismic shockwave combined with the simultaneous activation of every single energy-draining regulator in the city. The vanishing wasn't passive. It was an incredibly powerful, violent, and controlled catastrophe that obliterated their connection to this world, leaving behind only the perfect, silent evidence of their departure. The planning for the Great Unison took the Resonance Council decades. They knew they could not simply shift their physical matter. The energy required would incinerate the entire plateau. Instead, they focused on their core strength, frequency, and resonance. Their theory, derived from years of manipulating the telluric cord, centered on the idea that reality itself existed within a specific, measurable frequency range. If they could generate a sustained, high-amplitude, localized acoustic wave that was completely out of sync with the natural planetary frequency, they could potentially tear a localized temporal or dimensional seam. To prepare, the council had to secretly re-engineer the entire foundation of Sidon. Every one of the thousands of tuning stones had to be recalibrated. New, massive subterranean shafts were dug, leading deep into the geological fault line beneath the plateau, essentially turning the mountain into a giant, complex tuning fork. The populace, already suffering from the whisper sickness and distracted by the escalating, yet contained conflicts with the Varan patrols, were told these preparations were for a new era of enhanced harmonic protection. The core component of the unison was the Great Conduit, a colossal structure hidden beneath the nexus where Thorn had found the tablet. This conduit contained 3 types of highly reactive crystalline compounds, arranged in a helix pattern. When these crystals were subjected to immense targeted resonant frequency while simultaneously being bombarded with the harvested negative energy from the regulator, the resulting output would be a singular, short-lived pulse of staggering power, enough to force an entire city and its surrounding architecture out of phase with reality. The Night of the Unison, as described in the tablet's fragmented technical appendices, was not chaotic. It was eerily calm and meticulously executed. The entire population was instructed to enter the public plazas and lie down upon the carved floor, which was itself part of the resonant grid, wearing specially prepared, tightly woven linen garments designed to stabilize their individual frequencies during the transition. Every Sidonian understood the risk. Failure meant immediate, complete molecular disintegration. Success meant waking up in an optimized future. As the council initiated the sequence, the mountain began to tremble, not with a natural earthquake, but with a deep, deliberate, engineered tremor generated by the newly bored shafts hitting the fault line. This tremor was the catalyst, providing the initial raw mechanical energy. Simultaneously, the last remaining dissonant carriers, now reduced to husks, were subjected to the final, maximum energy drain in the regulator, flooding the great conduit with raw, chaotic psychic power. The combination was immediate and horrifyingly effective. The central crystal helix in the conduit, described in the tablet as the Heartstone, overloaded, releasing a visible, pulsing wave of energy. This was the moment of vanishing. The physical world around them would have experienced a brief, localized atmospheric ripple, perhaps a flash of unusual light, and then profound silence. The energy spike was so precise and so powerful that it didn't destroy the city. It merely pressed the pause button on its physical existence, like sliding a perfectly rendered photograph between 2 sheets of glass. The food remained on the table. The clothing remained folded. The essence of the city was preserved, but its occupants and their temporal footprint were instantly shifted just outside the conventional spectrum of observable reality, waiting for the predetermined geological conditions to reverse the process. They had achieved ultimate, if temporary, escape from the consequences of their darkness.
The technical precision of the Great Unison was breathtaking, confirming the Sidonians as masters of physics far beyond any recorded civilization. The energy pulse they generated wasn't designed to move them spatially, but temporally and dimensionally, locking them into a kind of localized, self-imposed purgatory. Thorn realized that the true function of the pervasive, low-frequency hum he had felt upon entering the city was not merely power generation, it was a holding pattern. The city, even empty, was vibrating at a fractional, dormant frequency, waiting for the main engine to be reactivated. This dormant frequency was the reason the city remained perfectly preserved, untouched by erosion, decay, or the millennia of surrounding seismic activity. It was a pocket of perpetual, suspended time, maintained by the residual energy of the great unison pulse. The Council's plan, audacious and chillingly executed, had several critical failsafes outlined in the schematics. The primary failsafe was the obsidian tablet itself. It was not merely a record, it was the final, hardwired trigger. The tablet was designed to activate only when exposed to a unique confluence of external energy signatures, signaling that the reboot conditions had been met. The tablet, resting now on the Serpent's Ledge pedestal, represented the key, but also the ultimate danger. It was the timer for the Sidonians' return. The geological criteria for reactivation, as deciphered from the last dense section of the tablet, were horrifyingly specific. The Sidonians needed a massive, naturally occurring energy spike that aligned perfectly with the residual frequency of their dormant city. They sought an event that would essentially reverse the unison pulse, pulling them back into phase with our reality. The tablet listed several environmental metrics, but the most crucial was a massive, non-volcanic, regional seismic event coupled with a specific fluctuation in the Earth's magnetic field, an event that would mimic the initial chaotic input they used to vanish. Thorne realized, with a sinking horror that gripped his stomach, that the very reason his expedition had discovered Sidon was the prelude to the reactivation. His heavily modified drilling equipment, designed to penetrate deep rock layers for geothermal samples, had inadvertently generated the precise, localized acoustic vibration necessary to breach the sealed valley. Furthermore, the extensive, modern seismic activity that had recently rocked the region, displacing the topsoil and revealing the entrance, perfectly matched the geological prerequisites detailed in the tablet. They hadn't just found a tomb. They had stumbled into a meticulously set trap, a high-stakes alarm clock, and they were the unwitting finger hitting the snooze button. The city wasn't forgotten. It was merely waiting for the right vibration to wake up. The chilling implication was that the Sidonians didn't fail. They succeeded. They had merely executed a long-term, extreme form of societal self-quarantine until the world was safer, or, more accurately, until the chaotic energy of the outside world could fuel their return. The darkness wasn't just in their past, it was their planned future. Thorne felt a rising panic. His team was still charting the upper residential layers, cataloging artifacts that were about to become property again. He rushed back toward the nexus, the low hum of the tuning stones now feeling less like preservation and more like anticipation, realizing they needed to find a way to deactivate the tablet before the entire region experienced a reality shift that would introduce a 3,500-year-old, technologically superior, and morally compromised civilization back into the modern world.
The race was now against time, frequency, and fate. Thorne frantically re-examined the immediate vicinity of the silent obsidian tablet, searching for any physical deactivation mechanism, but the Sidonians were too advanced for simple switches. Their technology was controlled by thought and resonant influence. The tablet was humming now, a palpable vibration against the serpentine pedestal, far stronger than the general background noise of the city. As Thorne leaned close, he detected another sound, faint but definite. A high-pitched, almost infrasonic whine emanating from the core of the tablet itself. It was processing data, calculating the precise moment of re-entry. His geologist, who had followed Thorne back, pointed out a subtle discoloration in the polished floor surrounding the pedestal, a concentric ring of dust disturbance,
as if something massive had only just been placed there. "It looks like a charging field, Doctor." "A transfer point," the geologist whispered, his voice trembling in the cavernous silence. Thorne understood immediately. The tablet was not merely the trigger. It was the receiver and the anchor point for the return sequence. The energy required to pull a whole civilization back into phase with reality was immense, and the tablet was drawing that power from the surrounding environment, specifically from the very modern equipment the expedition team had brought into the ancient city. The drills, the generators, the powerful satellite comms array, all were acting as inadvertent antennae, supplying the final, crucial surge of energy the tablet required. This explained why the city had been found now, and not a century ago. The presence of high-intensity, controlled electronic radiation was the final piece of the Sidonian puzzle. To stop the unison reversal, they had to isolate the tablet from all external energy sources, but simply turning off the generators was not enough. The tablet was already drawing power from the residual magnetic fields. Thorne realized the Council had engineered a perfect paradox. They had designed a system that guaranteed their reemergence only when a civilization technologically advanced enough to generate the required energy was present to trigger the device. Their own vanity and technical superiority had set the stage for their resurrection at the expense of whoever found them. The only chance they had was to disrupt the frequency itself. Thorne remembered the ancient scrolls describing the ultimate weapon of the Sidonians, not a weapon of mass destruction, but a weapon of mass dissonance. It was called the Chaos Chord, a mechanism designed to broadcast an unstable, multi-frequency acoustic wave that would temporarily shatter all localized harmonic fields. If deployed near the tablet, the resulting chaotic energy surge might confuse the anchor point, causing the great unison reversal to abort or dissipate the incoming Sidonians safely into the void. The problem was that the Chaos Chord was legendary, mentioned only in the most obscure protected texts. Texts that suggested it had been destroyed millennia ago due to its inherent danger to the wielder. Thorne, guided by faint memories of the translated texts, knew of only one possible location: the heart of the original regulator of residual energy, the nexus of pain, sealed beneath the filtration system. It was a long, desperate sprint down into the lowest, darkest level of the forgotten city, chasing the only thing that could save them: utter, terrifying chaos.
The journey into the regulator's core was a descent into the true psychological architecture of Sidon's darkness. Unlike the upper levels, which were polished and geometric, the regulator tunnels were rough-hewn, angular, and felt unnervingly cold, despite the geothermal warmth of the surrounding rock. These were the tunnels of suffering, the places where the dissonant carriers were systematically drained. Thorne's historian's mind, usually detached and analytical, struggled with the oppressive atmosphere. He could almost taste the millennia of manufactured despair hanging in the air. Deep inside, they found the wreckage of the regulator, a massive, ruined complex of shattered glass conduits and crystal matrices, violently destroyed during the Great Unison event when it released its final, cataclysmic burst of negative energy. Among the twisted metal and defunct acoustic dampeners, they found the Chaos Chord. It was a surprisingly compact device, resembling a multifaceted sphere of rough, dull metal, covered in a complex array of tiny, interlocking acoustic vents. It radiated a feeling of imbalance, a technological sickness that promised instant disharmony. The tablet upstairs was now screaming, its subtle whine escalating into a rhythmic, deafening pulse. Time was dissolving.
The unison reversal sequence was reaching its peak. As Thorne grabbed the chaos cord, the geologist yelled, pointing up the tunnel. The air itself was warping. The light from their headlamps, previously crisp and clean, began to refract wildly, splitting into unnerving, shifting spectrums. Dust motes suspended in the air suddenly elongated, stretching impossibly before snapping back. The mountain was groaning, and this time, it wasn't the sound of an earthquake. It was the sound of reality being forcibly bent. The Sidonians were returning. Thorne scrambled back up, clutching the chaos cord, the vibrations in his hand intensifying until his bones ached. He knew the risks. Activating the chaos cord at close range was suicidal. It was designed to shatter all harmonic coherence, which meant it would instantly destabilize every biological function in the immediate vicinity. But failing to act meant unleashing a morally bankrupt, super-advanced civilization onto an unprepared modern world. As he reached the nexus, the sight was terrifying. The obsidian tablet was now floating 6 inches above the pedestal, encased in a shimmering, violent aura of purple energy. And within that energy, vague, shifting silhouettes were beginning to coalesce. The faint outlines of figures, perhaps hundreds of them, caught in the act of materializing. Their return was imminent. The outlines were pale, tall, and utterly still, exactly as described in the final records, motionless, waiting for the re-entry phase to complete. Thorne had perhaps 10 seconds before the Sidonians, masters of frequency and control, stepped back into time. He planted the chaos cord directly adjacent to the now hovering tablet, braced himself against a nearby pillar, and activated the device. The chaos cord exploded not with noise, but with an anti-noise, a screaming wave of absolute dissonance. The frequency of the ancient city, the very low-frequency hum that had preserved it, was immediately countered by a barrage of unstable, unpredictable frequencies. The effect was instantaneous and violent.
The backlash of the chaos cord was not a sound, but a sensation. A punch to the chest delivered by pure, incoherent energy. Thorne felt his equilibrium vanish, his vision tunneling to a single, blinding white point, and every molecule in his body vibrating independently, agonizingly, threatening to tear him apart. The intended effect, however, was achieved with devastating efficiency. The purple aura around the obsidian tablet immediately flickered, convulsed, and then imploded. The geometric, stabilizing field was shattered by the influx of raw chaos. The shimmering silhouettes of the returning Sidonians vanished instantly, not with a burst of light, but with the sickening sound of snapping static. The great unison reversal was aborted, cut off mid-transit. The obsidian tablet, the magnificent anchor of their return, slammed back down onto the pedestal, its reflective surface now cracked and scarred, the high-pitched whine replaced by a mournful, dying sizzle. The mountain city, however, did not collapse. The pervasive low hum, the protective frequency that had sustained Sidon for millennia, was still active, fighting against the localized chaos unleashed by the cord. The cord itself sputtered and died, its internal mechanisms destroyed by the overload of dissonance. Silence returned, deeper and heavier than before, a silence that felt less like preservation and more like mourning. Thorne, ears ringing and muscles cramping, slowly regained his senses. He crawled toward the pedestal. The tablet was deactivated, inert, its power source exhausted. The Sidonians were gone, not just vanished, but banished.
potentially forever dispersed into the chaotic dimensional seam from which they had tried to return. He and his team had succeeded, but the cost was the realization that history is not always about what we find, but what we accidentally prevent. The civilization that had vanished overnight had almost returned overnight, thanks entirely to modern man's insatiable drive for progress and energy. Thorne spent the next harrowing week documenting the full extent of the regulator and the Nexus, ensuring that every piece of knowledge regarding Sidon's dark technological prowess was cataloged, not for public consumption, but for sequestered scholarly analysis. The decision was clear. The world could never know the full scope of Sidon's power or the horrific moral framework upon which it was built. The Serpent's Coil Mountains had sealed the civilization once, and they would seal it again. As Thorne prepared the final charges to reseal the entrance, he looked one last time at the city, now truly a tomb. It wasn't a warning against ambition. It was a warning against perfection. Sidon had sought to eliminate every variable, every dissonance, every human flaw, and in doing so, they had sacrificed their humanity for their golden age. Their vanishing was the ultimate, tragic commentary on the pursuit of ultimate control. When you control everything, the only option left for survival is to disappear entirely. They were the ghost in the machine, and now, thanks to the Chaos Cord, they were merely the faint echo in the mountain rock. Their legacy was the dark truth that the most stable societies are often built upon the most unstable, horrifying secrets, and that sometimes the greatest historical discoveries are those that are deliberately, ethically forgotten, ensuring the past remains buried to protect the future from the consequences of ultimate power and ultimate despair.